Give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money.
It's an excuse I've heard over and over and over again. It's a metaphor. Either to dismiss criticism that's too uncomfortable to address head on, or when the audience/creators wants to pretend there's something more deep and insightful about a story than there previously was. Now, I've usually taken this down with just portray things directly, but a big barrier to such a simple concept is the avalanche of pretentious hipster wank pieces about how metaphors are great and amazing and subtlety is king, and a bunch of even dumber pretentious hipster morons who can't comprehend the unspoken rule that absolutes are bad and think everything needs to be cloaked in allegory and metaphor and written so subtly. So here's why you're all stupid. In the last video, we talked about how just portraying gay couples directly without being coy is something a lot of writers seem incapable of doing, and I attributed it to narcissists wanting to be praised without doing any work. But there's a secondary reason I didn't touch on, and that's the fact that a large group of people have been gaslit into believing that everything needs to be subtle. I get people asking me for writing advice when it comes to gay and trans characters and how to introduce them, and almost every time the issue they're having is that they don't know how to introduce them as gay or trans without saying it outright. And they always crumble at my first question: why are you trying to avoid saying it outright? I mentioned a few videos ago that when I want to introduce a character as gay, my go-to is to introduce the audience to her wife or girlfriend and have that character introduce them as such. This is saying it outright, which if you believe people who are totally just giving you helpful writing advice and not trying to gaslight you into hiding the gay people, honest, this is something you're not supposed to do. Yet people refer to their significant other by the appropriate terminology in real life all the time. If you've ever introduced a girlfriend or boyfriend to anyone else, you've probably used the appropriate terminology unless you're one of those pretentious fucks who says partner. And yet people have it in their head that to introduce a character's same-sex love interest needs to involve not using any pre-established terminology, to completely ignore the concept that words mean things and dance around the issue. Even people who want to write good LGBT representation keep falling into this trap of refusing to say gay. Even Ruby and Sapphire were described as being very close. The problem is that very close can mean a lot of things and most of the time is decidedly not romantic. Honey and her mother are very close. Arthur and Pal are very close. Kim and Monique are very close. Woody and Andy are very close. Elsa and Anna are very close. Diantha and her Gardevoir are very close.
But this keystone is part of the bond I have with Gardevoir. Bond? I can't lend it to anyone, sorry.
This is what happens when a community gaslights itself into thinking vagary is mandatory. Good scenes written by people who aren't stupid become weird. We talk about Steven Universe in relation to these problems a lot because it's the only example where the runaway metaphors start to reflect extremely poorly on the creator. I know I talk about Steven Universe a lot on this show, and many of you are no doubt sick of it, but Glass of Water has always been about using bad shows as a basic writing lesson and debunking bad ideas from idiot fanboys, and Steven Universe has more fuck-ups and aggressively sycophantic fanboys than any other cartoon on the market today, so there's no shortage of material involved with it. And if I want to talk about the problems with metaphors as the end-all and be-all for storytelling, well, this is the best example of why that attitude doesn't work. Steven Universe, and admittedly a lot of cartoons these days, are written with a fanfiction mindset. Remember the mid-2000s where fanfiction was this crazy, weird, unhinged place where people were mashing genres together and shoving every idea into their stories in whatever order they thought it would be cool? It was a lot like Kingdom Hearts, twists and turns that complicated the story for no other reason than the author thought it was cool. This resulted in a ramping up of more epic! Stakes get constantly higher, antagonists get more and more threatening, and then suddenly your high school AU is having the dark denizens of the underworld breaking through the floor to devour the souls of the Forsaken. I've witnessed this problem happen before, like a My Little Pony fanfic that starts off as a polyamorous shipfic before the fucking Grim Reaper and the souls of those long past and the realm beyond death all become major plot elements. Or a Pokemon fanfic that starts off as just another let me narrate my trainer journey story before it introduces shape-shifting edgy darkness men, prophecies about kingdoms long past, silver princesses, people getting their souls corrupted by the darkness Pokemon, suicide bombing a pack of Cacturns, stabbing a Metagross in the eyes with a knife, banshee fucking, and a gun. Steven Universe is a lot like that. It's not enough to just talk about issues like homophobia, abuse, gaslighting, or self-hatred. We've got to do all that in the most epic way possible! Stuff like this is the only reason why Steven Universe goes to the weird extremes that it does. More and more crap gets piled onto the story out of a misguided attempt to be more epic. Why are Homeworld the bad guys in this story? Because they slaughtered 14 million gems. Why did they do this? because they're sad. The decision to make the Diamonds be abusive parents but also fascist dictators came entirely from a desire to be super epic because that's the only way some creators know how to create tension. Yeah, a self-hatred plot might seem exciting when literally billions of lives are at stake, but it often seems like a lot of creators and viewers are unaware that personal stories with low stakes can be just as, if not more, enriching. There's a reason that these themes are often covered in slice of life shows because they're simply more appropriate there. It harkens back to that insecurity we talked about. People want to fill animated shows with as much epic stakes, big wars, violence, death, and booming action because they really want animation to be taken seriously, and this is the only way they know how to do it, which incidentally is the reason that it's not taken seriously. How do we make the animated version of Logan or The Dark Knight? Oh, but without killing the bad guys because that would conflict with my kindergarten level moral beliefs? Even worse with Steven Universe is that it uses metaphors for things it could easily portray directly because metaphors and stand-ins are usually meant to be able to sneak themes in you couldn't otherwise portray. The idea that the Diamonds are a stand-in for abusive families doesn't work because a dysfunctional family doesn't actually need a stand-in. And that's weird because it's not like this is something Sugar is unaware of. The entire Sardonyx arc takes advantage of the fact that fusion is associated with intimate relationships to get a theme through about sexual assault. And we're going to come back to that in a bit because I have more to say about why that doesn't actually work. But regardless, when it came to the main story, this went completely backwards. Fascist dictators are used as a stand-in for a dysfunctional family when a dysfunctional family doesn't actually need a stand-in, especially not a stand-in so extreme and toxic to its overall theme. Additionally, that pithy excuse doesn't work because even if the story is taken entirely on what it's supposed to be a stand-in for, since dozens of people tell me that it's not meant to be taken literally, as if that's an actual excuse, it still comes to a boneheaded, wrong, and dangerous conclusion, namely that your family might hate your guts, never listen to you, treat you like garbage, disrespect your very personhood, and only show any actual affection for you after you're dead. Whose parents does that remind you of? But it's your responsibility to just get over that and make nice because they're still your family. So let me ask the charity cases in the back row whose entire worldview is based on the last 5 BreadTube videos they watched. Why is it that when Steven Universe does this, it's a positive and nuanced lesson? But when Family Guy pulled this exact same fucking stunt several years ago, all of us are ready to lynch McFarlane for it? Don't actually answer that because I already know. You like Steven Universe and you think it's positive, therefore you view anything it does as positive regardless of the actual circumstances. Steven Universe could do an ad campaign for Cyanusil and some of y'all would defend it as a positive lesson for kids. Speaking as someone who was abused by her parents, fuck you. No kid should ever be told that they need to make nice with their abusers. Never, in any way, shape, or form. This comes back to the bigger problem of the dogmatic way the show tries to handle forgiveness, namely that everyone deserves forgiveness even if they haven't properly atoned. Let's get down to brass tack. This idea is wrong and stupid and wrong. Time to take that pin out because this isn't the first time Steven Universe has done this, as the Sardonyx arc, despite carrying massive sexual assault themes, ultimately ends with Garnet and Pearl being forced into a situation where they have to make up or they'll die. The creator puts a metaphorical gun to Garnet's head and orders her to forgive Pearl. So here's my question. Did this scene with the shrinking room need to be here to resolve the story? Don't answer that, because I already have the answer. No, it didn't. It could have been written a dozen other ways that weren't so toxic. What if, and bear with me here, Steven Universe fans, because I'm about to blow your mind, what if Garnet talked to Pearl herself, without the tension of impeding death? Keystone Motel ends with Garnet telling Pearl, not now, as in, we'll talk later, I need space. And as a temporary conclusion to that story to put it to bed until a later time, it was great. This could have been addressed in a very respectful, very positive way, but that potential got sacrificed on the altar of forgiveness. They have to make up, and it has to be right now, because that's the only wavelength the creator is working on, and all the steps to get there are a massive contrivance. The same thing happens with the Diamonds. They're made more powerful than 500 nukes, specifically to make talking it out literally the only option. It has to go in the direction of forgiveness at any cost. Let's say it really was entirely meant to be a metaphor for dysfunctional families. I'll walk with you to that pier. The same problem exists in that it comes to the wrong conclusion. We often have this cultural obligation to be close to our families, and children of abusive parents are pressured to forgive and put everything past them even when no consequences or true atonement has happened. A lot of people talk about the importance of cutting toxic people out of their lives, but when those people are one's own parents, suddenly the conversation shifts to, but family. That cultural belief is nonsense. To any kids watching this who might have seen those episodes and picked up on this particular theme, let me be blunt with you. You do not have to remain on good terms with your family in spite of their abuse. If your family has hurt you, repeatedly disrespected you, manipulated you, gaslit you, abused you, or done any other kinds of horrible things to you, you have no obligation to them whatsoever, and there is no shame in turning your back on a family that doesn't care about you and finding a new one. And it disgusts me that so many people are eager to tell abused children otherwise, and that such a toxic, wrong, and gross theme is so easily ignored by otherwise progressive people because the realization that their interests aren't completely 100% enlightened is too devastating for their egos. This is the real problem with metaphor as a defense of strange writing decisions. Metaphors mean things. Just having a metaphor doesn't instantly make a story good, as I've explained numerous times in the past. It's all about how the creator handles the thing they're actually talking about. Having a metaphor for a dysfunctional family ultimately doesn't work if you decide to push a blood is thicker than water narrative, because that resolution is bad. Forgiving a long-time abuser just to be the bigger person is bad. Encouraging children to think that way is bad. Pushing a narrative of my family right or wrong is bad. This is the part we ultimately stumble at, and why simply telling people what the metaphor is supposed to be, or what the central theme of the story is supposed to be, isn't an actual defense, Sarah, because sometimes creators say things in their art that are completely fucking stupid. You can have a metaphor for a dysfunctional family, but if you're someone who advocates forgiving abusive family members just because they're family, then the metaphor defense isn't going to save you because we got the metaphor. You're still gross. You can have a metaphor for sexual assault. It won't matter if you contrive a situation for the victim to either forgive the person who assaulted them or die. You can have an episode about having to deal with that relative at Thanksgiving, but if you force everyone in the story to bend to his twisted and outdated worldview, then the only conclusion to draw from the story is that you are that relative. You can have a metaphor for puberty, but it won't matter if you're a gross piece of shit who thinks someone in puberty suddenly has the body of an adult and how that gives them power. That's when people start pulling out your gross Ed, Edd and Eddy fan art and going, I wonder if these two things are related. Maybe this is a bigger issue throughout the industry and there are other people like you controlling what children get to watch.
You enjoyed that. You're damned right.
What you write, what you advocate, and what you decide to portray as a positive decision within the confines of your story says something about you. Steven can always talk down the monster because the creator thinks that's how people should behave, and as such forces it to work within her story. If you are influenced by Steven Universe, you are being told to forgive your abusive family without question. And the only people who think that's a positive lesson are the people who cause families to become abusive and dysfunctional. I want you to take note of something. You see how the three big issues we've talked about in this video using Steven Universe as a case study, the aggressive need for everything to be epic, constant plot contrivances to force the stories in a specific direction, and the core themes being pushed with such an utter lack of nuance all collide into each other? You remember how my biggest criticism of Steven Universe is the fascist apologia? Well, this is the reason that happened. A compulsive need to raise the stakes, a lack of concern for basic writing skills, and the writer having absolutely zero understanding of the issues they're alluding to. This is why I apply Hanlon's razor, because the core writing issues that caused this to happen are also the cause of all the other non-bootlicky issues Steven Universe has. You can go through almost every story arc the show has and find this cycle of raising the stakes, plot contrivances, and forced hasty resolutions. And in fact, you can go through a lot of shows with similarly written story arcs and find the same issue because many of these shows are cut from the same cloth. Hell, many of them share crew members. There's a reason I call this an industry trend because it happens a lot. Redemption arcs are old hat, but the very specific and identical way modern redemption arcs are made since 2010 is rather new, with fake depth and pretensions toward Freudian excuses resulting in almost instant turnarounds. It's a mass-produced story type that works the exact same way every single time. And more shows, especially cartoons, are trying to be more than just children's shows. But because they are children's shows, they're stuck to the same restrictions that children's shows have. So they're in an environment where the creators have to be a lot more clever, and well, they're not clever. Trying to take an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind and present it as some kind of important theme isn't smart writing. Smart writing is understanding that the absolutist condemnation of violence against the violent as some kind of turning point isn't actually the smart moral thing that centrists and performative liberals like to think it is. That the world isn't comfortable, that sometimes you can't just hug it out. It doesn't even have to strictly be about violence. It's about teaching children that no one solution is going to work all the time. That sometimes saving the world isn't actually going to make you feel all warm and fuzzy. Sometimes you might have to ask yourself hard questions. That sometimes
you can't always save everybody.
And most importantly of all, it's okay to have those moments where you're unsure, where you wonder if you did the right thing, or that it's okay to occasionally put aside your morals for a moment, even if it means helping people. And if that means that sometimes, when all other avenues have been exhausted, you have to take down someone who not only can, but will hurt people, you probably should. I don't think there's anything particularly bad in teaching children that sometimes violence is the answer, because sometimes people just won't listen. In my experience, children who absorb that lesson early tend to grow up to be a lot more well-adjusted. And I keep repeating sometimes because I know someone's gonna call me a bloodthirsty psychopath and I want an easy thing to clip to throw back into their stupid faces. Personally, I find nothing deep or mature about this forgiveness at any cost mentality. That never struck me as mature because it's too easy. Applying one solution to every situation and refusing to budge is dogmatic. It is inherently simple-minded. It's much like when white liberals start yammering on about the evils of woke brands and rainbow capitalism, navel-gazing dressed up as something insightful.